raise it, and we'll answer all of that. But planning, directing how you're going to age, we all have a part to play in how we're going to do this to the best of our ability. And today is just really, I think, a starting point. Our company is glad to be a resource to have conversations like this in the future. And so I just want to let you know that we'll talk in other gatherings about this on Friday. We'll just pick up where we left off and keep going, if that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Kelly Finley, who is also a gerontologist, and also a financial advisor. So she has a perspective on the wheel of aging that a number of financial professionals have in different ways. So I'm going to ask her to come up and speak about some of the common financial issues. And I'm going to keep this mic on, and then so you can either, I'm just going to hover without growling her and just interject. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Spencer. So I wanted to start by explaining how the three of us know each other. We actually were asked that question before we kicked off, and how all three of us know each other is our circles interlap quite frequently. So I actually moved here from Oklahoma about 7 years ago. My husband was in the Air Force, and that brought us down here. And my background is in senior living. So I used to work in assisted livings and nursing homes, and along the way got my master's in gerontology. And when I moved down here, I was working in an assisted living community, and I was like, you know what? I need to find an elder law attorney because I know I'm going to need that in my circle of influence. So I went on good old Google, typed in San Antonio elder law, and the Carol Birch Law Firm was the first one that popped up. And I called their office, introduced myself, and basically the rest is history. They've taken care of a lot of my clients in the past, and how I met Spencer through all of that was care managers. A lot of times, as he mentioned, folks need care managers, and they also have what's the name of your group that meets on a quarterly basis, all the gerontologists?
Oh, the Aging Life Care Association.
The Aging Life Care Association. We actually hosted them at the assisted living that I was at, and so we found out quite quickly our commonality with gerontology. It was really kind of fun. But I have since left the senior living field to become a financial advisor, and the reason I did that is I encountered a lot of people who just hadn't planned and prepared. They came with questions. How much does it cost? What do I need to be doing? And the number one thing, day in and day out, I'd have a constant conversation. No, Medicare doesn't cover assisted living or a nursing home. Medicare is not enough. Or maybe you can't. So I became a financial advisor so that I can help folks plan and prepare for that. So inside of your folder on the right-hand side, behind the blue sheet, there is a Edward Jones flyer. We're not going to go over everything because it's 6 pages and quite wordy, but there is a visual on there. Inside on the second page, it says bar graph, if y'all want to look at that. And this is from 2021. It's the average cost of long-term care options. And what I want to start with is talking about assisted living. First and foremost is, do you all know what the different levels of care are? Some of you do, some of you don't. So you have independent living. I always liken it to college without the classes. You get to have all the fun. You still maintain an independent lifestyle. Assisted living is where they start helping with activities of daily living. So think about the things you do in the morning. Brushing your teeth, using the restroom, etc. So that's assisted living. And then nursing home is the level above that, where you have a 24-hour nurse on staff that can help with just a higher level of care. So most folks that we find here in the San Antonio area are about 84 or so is the average age of move-in into an assisted living. And the average length of stay is usually about 18 to 24 months. And so this is a nationwide cost from Genworth, but the average cost of assisted living for one person was $54,000 in 2021. And if you're like me, that makes you take a little gasp there, like, it's kind of expensive. So how are we going to plan and prepare for this? Well, it all comes down to talking about that financial plan and strategy before you need to implement it. So we're all about being proactive. So on the next page, you'll see long-term, I think it's actually, sorry, page 5. There's a big graph there that talks about long-term care options and trade-offs. So we have a couple of options whenever we come to that point in our life where we need to hire a caregiver to help us in the home for a few hours a week, a couple days a week, and then maybe when we start needing that 24-hour care. And so the couple different ways that you can prepare yourself for that is, first and foremost, is what is it that you want? Do you want to be able to age in your home until you pass away? Most people do, but you also have to be realistic. What if I can't? Where am I going to be moving, and how am I going to be able to afford that? So the first option is you can self-insure. So basically that 401k or that pension, or basically that money in the bank. That's option number 1. The second option is you could have traditional long-term care insurance. Now, traditional long-term care insurance is kind of a love-hate relationship, if we're honest, because it's use or lose. So I always use the story of my grandfather. He had a John Hancock long-term care policy, bought it in the 80s, diligently paid those premiums, and when he passed away in 2017, he never got to use it. He declined so rapidly in his health that he didn't even outlive the elimination period or the waiting period. So our family got nothing, and John Hancock basically got 30 years worth of premiums. So they have, next to that, the second or the third column is the hybrid linked insurance policies. Those are more of what we see on the market today. And basically what those are is it is a life insurance policy that you can use towards long-term care costs, but you can have a little bit more flexibility with them. And the final column, the life insurance with the long-term care chronic illness rider, I just think of it as a bell and whistle on your vehicle. That is one that we see a lot of today because it acts dually as a life insurance policy, but can also help with the cost of care. So say, for example, you had a $500,000 policy. I die tomorrow driving on the road. Well, my spouse gets $500,000. But if I live long enough to be able to need that for care, I can draw down from that $500,000 bucket. Maybe I use $250,000 and then I pass away. Well, my survivors get that $250,000. Or maybe I use all of it, use up that bucket, and then I start relying on my 401k or my IRA. So there's a lot of different options out there, but it's important to start talking about these things because obviously the older that you get, the more expensive these can become. And it may come down to it's not worth it to be spending hundreds of dollars on a long-term care insurance premium. Just financially doesn't make sense. But talking with those that are going to be part of your supportive network, letting them know, what is that plan? I want to be able to age at home. Maybe I need to make some modifications. And how is that going to be mapped out financially? Or maybe I move in with my adult children, and what does that look like? And the role that I play as a financial advisor is helping you have those conversations and painting that financial picture. Option A, I age in my home. Option B, I live in my home, and if I have a fall and it's just not good, then at that point I know that's the trigger that I need to be moving into an independent living or assisted living. And what does that cost look like? And Kelly, can I afford it? We can map all of that out. I would much rather you have an answer to that question today while you're healthy than when you're in the hospital and then your son or daughter comes knocking and say, hey, what are we gonna do with mom and dad? Because when you're in crisis mode, you're not gonna be making the best choices. You take the first option that comes along and it may not be the best option. And so how we kind of facilitate that leads into Brennan with talking about estate planning and powers of attorney. So Brennan, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Yeah, one of the things, if Brennan comes up, can you hear me okay? If this is a fluid thing, conversation, I hope that you will be thinking in your mind, probably already are, about how these issues intertwine. We're all dealing with these issues at some level. Not all of us are facing buying a long-term care insurance policy. Not all of us are thinking about moving to assisted living or a place, but we're having some level of conversation. So I hope that you're continuing to appreciate the integration of these components of what successful aging is. People say, well, how do I age gracefully? How do I do this well? There's no one size fits all. So I appreciate Kelly's perspective because the financial component is really significant as we move forward. So thank you for that. And Brendan Bowes is going to talk a little bit, and we're just going to begin our conversation. And again, if you have a question, please don't be shy. These people aren't shy either. They can stop. We'll stop what we're doing for you to have a thought. So Brendan, talk to us about some of the legal issues in aging.
Sure. My name is Brendan Bowes. I work at the law offices at Carroll Birch here in town. And our firm is focused on what's called elder law. And it is pretty much what it sounds like. We are focused on the legal issues of seniors, people with special needs and their families. How do we best serve them and the unique issues that come about as we age? And so a little bit about my background. I spent actually 10 years as a trial lawyer in Houston. And after a while, I got tired of fighting everybody and thought, you know what, I need to do something where I work directly with people. I want to help people directly and feel good about that. And coming to work with Carroll has been a godsend. It has been wonderful. And I am just thrilled to be able to provide these services to folks that need them. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is kind of the legal side of estate planning. And when I say estate planning, a lot of folks jump back and say, well, is that really for me? I don't have an estate per se, but really estate planning is something that everybody needs to do regardless of what your situation is financially. And in my opinion, there's three main prongs of it. There's the one prong, and in your folders there's a blue sheet of paper that has some definitions about some of the concepts that I'll be talking about. But they're mostly straightforward. But the first prong in estate planning is the typical situation, what happens to my assets when I'm gone? That's things like wills and trusts. The biggest question I usually get asked is, do I need a will or do I need a trust? And as a lawyer, the answer is always, it depends. In my opinion, a will is something that everyone needs, because if you don't have a will, the state of Texas decides what happens to everything you own after you're gone. And that can lead to a lot of unintended consequences, not just unintended consequences, but financial burdens on the family, because transferring someone's assets after they're gone when they don't have a will is typically a much more complicated and expensive process than if you have a will. And that process is called probate. That's where the will is taken to court. The court looks at it and says this is valid, and then authorizes a person who is named in the will to settle the estate, to take care of debts, to make sure assets are distributed the way that the will says, and to oversee that whole process. So a will is a pretty straightforward document, but you need to be careful when you're drafting your will. You want to make it as easy as possible for your executor. That's the person who carries it out. Because otherwise the probate process can get quite complicated. So if you got a will, people ask me, do I need a trust? And a trust is a measure, it's a document that essentially you put all of your assets, your home, your bank accounts, your investment accounts, you title them in the name of the trust. And the key benefit of that is that, unlike a person, a trust never dies. So that when the main person who created the trust passes on, the trust keeps going. You don't have to go to court. You don't have to go through the probate process, because the trust dictates where everything goes and who's in charge of making sure it goes to where it's supposed to go. Trusts are complicated documents, and they require management by the person making it. Like I say, you have to if you own a home, you have to deed that home into the trust. So it is a little more complicated. I think if you own properties in multiple states, for example, that's a really good reason to have a trust, because you don't want to have to do probate in multiple areas. But if you have complicated assets, different business entities that you hold assets with, a trust may be a good option for you. Otherwise, though, in most cases, I find a will is a perfectly valid way of doing things, and it serves most people well. If you are looking to make sure your family does not have to go through that probate process after you're gone, there are ways that we can avoid probate even without a trust. So that's something that I would just encourage you, if you've got a lawyer, to talk to them about. You want to focus with somebody that focuses on estate planning, because these are complicated issues and you want to make sure you're being steered in the right direction. But the key thing is planning in advance. Have that will in place, have that trust in place, so that when something happens to you and you pass on, then your family is not left at the mercy of the state, essentially. Making sure, taking care of your affairs. But that's only the first prong. And yes, ma'am.
Well, a trust, someone has to be placed in charge of administering the trust, right?
That's very true.
And that cannot be just any individual.
Well, a lot of times the trust, the person who makes the trust is the initial trustee. So during their lifetime, they're usually in charge of managing it for themselves. Now, there are more complicated types of trusts that require you to name somebody else for asset protection purposes. But in the standard living trust that most people think of when they think of a trust, the grantor, the person who creates the trust, often serves as the trustee. But you're correct, you have to name a backup so that when something happens to you, either incapacity or death, someone is there to step in and manage the trust when you're gone. Yes, so that's very true. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a professional. It can be a family member, and it often is a family member. But it needs to be somebody trustworthy and competent. Yes, ma'am.
What about the use of, in Texas at least, we have, what you call it, a transfer on death. Is that used often? Is that effective?
That is very effective, and that's what I was saying, that even aside from trusts, there are ways that you can avoid probate. And one of the key ways is through what you just brought up. It's called a transfer on death deed, or a ladybird deed. And that is a piece of paper. It's a deed, just like you're buying and selling property. But what it says is that I want to give this property to my child, but it only takes effect at your death. And you record that in the property records, just like you would if you were buying or selling a piece of property. And so it's there, and at the moment of your death, your child is now the new owner of that home without having to go to court, without having to jump through a bunch of hoops. So talking to an estate planning attorney, I think, is really key, because it can remove a lot of these burdens on families, the probate process and otherwise. So I think that's a very good point. Yes, sir.
All wills need to go through probate.
Yes, sir. Wills need to be probated. A will is just a piece of paper until a court blesses it and says this is a valid will, and gives a court order to the executor that allows them to buy and sell property, to transfer it to the people that it's supposed to go to in the will, and to get into bank accounts and move money around to pay debt. So yes, sir, a will needs to be probated. That's one of the downsides. But so it's not a lot of states where you have to go back to court over and over and over again. In Texas, it's a fairly streamlined process. Yes, sir.
Is there a dollar amount before estate tax kicks in?
Yes, sir. Inheritances are tax-free under $12 million. So if you have less than $12 million, or if you're a married couple, $24 million, there is no tax on inheritance.
Estate tax is a federal law.
That's federal. There is no state inheritance tax. Yes, ma'am.
What if we have only one son? What is an heirship? I'm going back to heirship. H-E-I-R, heirship, what is that?
Yes, ma'am. Heirship is when someone passes away without a will or a trust. And that's, the state of Texas has a long, complicated chart that determines if somebody passes away without a will, who are their legal heirs. But you want to avoid that process if possible, because an heirship determination is a more complicated probate proceeding than just probating a simple will.
So if you have a will, heirship is not put in. You have a will, heirship is a no good.
Heirship does not really come into play. The probate is just determining what the will says, who is supposed to get these assets, and making sure it goes to them. Heirship involves the court doing an investigation to determine if there are unknown heirs out there. Maybe there are children from a prior relationship that aren't being spoken for. So it's just a more complicated procedure. Yes, ma'am.
Should a will be filed in Baker County?
The will is only, well, you can store your will at the courthouse for a small fee. And so that way it's there for your executor to come get at any time. But a will is not actually filed with the county until after someone passes on. So you have 4 years after someone's death in which to probate the will, in which case that means filing it with the court, making sure it's proven valid. Yes, ma'am.
If someone has done one of these transfer on death deeds for the home they have, or the property they own, does a will still come into effect for other assets, or does it negate the transfer on death deed?
No, the transfer on death deed supersedes the will. So even if you say in your will, I want my home to go to son A, but you do a transfer on death deed that says it goes to daughter B, it's going to go to daughter B in that transfer on death deed. So the other side of the coin, the other prong of estate planning is not just planning on what happens after death, but what happens if you're incapacitated. And that's something a lot of people don't like to think about, but it's very, very important. Because if you don't have powers of attorney in place, or if you don't have a family member who is a signer on your bank accounts or your investment accounts, those accounts are going to be frozen if you're not able to go there physically and do it yourself, unless you've given power of attorney to someone. And power of attorney in Texas is split in two. There is a financial side and a medical side. And the financial side is just authorizing somebody else to do business in your name if you're not able to. The medical side is, of course, if I am incapacitated and medical treatment is needed, this is the person that the doctor is going to ask to consent to that treatment. But having those documents in place is really important, especially if you have a big family or if you have very little family, to make sure that it's the person that you want that's making these decisions. Because otherwise, guardianship may be the only alternative. And guardianship is a complicated, expensive, and long process that is very hard on families. So power of attorney is very important. Yes, sir?
Power of attorney, does it have to be signed, notarized, and filed somewhere?
They don't need to be filed somewhere, but they need to be notarized. And the medical power of attorney, if it's not notarized, attorney's abilities are going to be. And so it may seem it's kind of a deceptively simple document, but I encourage folks to talk to somebody who knows about this stuff to make sure that you're making the choices to make it as flexible as possible on your agent to make sure that they can do what they need to do. And with that, I will pass it to Spencer.
Well, thank you, Brendan. And thank you for taking the invitation seriously and just raising questions. When I have had opportunities to be with medical professionals like doctors and nurses, when an attorney's in the room, people ask questions. And I hope you're starting to see from what Kelly, Brendan, and I are talking about from different perspectives. We both play in the same sandbox because we're dealing with families and seeing some of these issues in aging. Brendan's focus is he's an attorney. Kelly is a financial advisor. As a gerontologist, as a consultant, we're all seeing it for different ways. And so I hope that you will also become to appreciate the value of putting your team together and consulting with folks. So thank you, Brennan. And I hope also we're whetting your appetite, not just literally for the lunch that's to come, but when I am with a group like this, I like to say my goal is to help stimulates some thinking in your mind so that when you walk out of the door, you have more questions than when you came in. That's kind of strange, but my goal, really, our goal is we can't answer everything. Even if we had 2 hours. Aging is fluid. Aging is dynamic. Aging can be exciting and it can be hard. She introduced some areas that people consider, and I think should consider, and that is, what tools am I going to use to fund services? Am I going to pay for it myself? Am I going to have enough cash flow or assets that I can liquidate to pay the $50,000+ that she said a year, an average assisted living cost, knowing that there are lots of other variables? There are a number of different options, and what we all see, and you probably can relate to this, where do people want to be as they age? Most people want to be at home. Not everybody wants to be at home. There are a number of people that decide, you know, when I start having issues, I want to be in a supportive environment and I want to be around more resources that can help me. And others say, not until I'm my last breath do you wheel me out of here and take me to a nursing home, even to an apartment complex where those old people live. Right? So think about where you want to live. And there are options living at home. People often bring in help. Sometimes that is covered by long-term care insurance. It's not always covered, or very rarely covered, by Medicare and Medicaid. A common question that we all receive is, oh, well, Medicare covers everything, right? Medicare is my primary insurance. It's going to pay for my care forever. No. It's great Medicare is around, but it doesn't last forever. I was telling a couple of folks this morning, I have a client who is dealing with paraplegia and very medically complex, 4 different hospitals since May 23rd, 2022. She's still in the hospital today. As her care manager, I'm paying attention to the fact that Medicare doesn't pay for you to be in a hospital for 6 months or 2 years. I mean, Medicare will finally say, enough is enough. And so I'm trying to help her medical team do what they need to do so they don't run out of their benefits. She goes home. So staying at home versus bringing in help. And there are certain medical resources and non-medical resources that you can look at. Funding, again, this has a financial component. And it also has a legal component because, as Brennan talked to, there are some legal tools that we as consumers can use in our planning to help make sure that our assets are transferred to the way we want them to. It doesn't mean that we can stash $4 million in the state of Texas and pretend it's not there. But there are ways to do it if we plan. People say, well, Medicare covers it, or long-term care covers it, or what about the VA or veteran? Surely that helps. Well, Veterans Administration has some services, but none of these stand alone by themselves to cover you. So it's important to understand the breadth and scope of the funding sources. So if you have Medicare and a supplement, and you have drug coverage, and you have life insurance, you're just adding protection so that you have more choices about how you're going to live your life as you continue to grow up. That's how I look at aging, as growing up. You know, we were talking about people that have gone to 40 and 50 and 65-year high school college reunions. You're just still college kids growing up, right? I mean, you're still college kids growing up. And I would also say that it's important to take every situation and evaluate it on its own merit. I mentioned this phone call I had from my dad today, and it was more about he was just paying attention to his own well being. He's seen his doctor, by the way. He lives in a community, thankfully, where there's a doctor downstairs, full time. So he's going to see the doctor, see if this is a clot issue that's in the, somehow impede his ability to take care of the love of his life. Almost 59, over 59 years. So, assessing the situation, not everybody has a will, not everyone has financial assets, not everyone has a family that works together as a team and is on the same page. Not everyone has the support of a church family, not everyone fill in the blank. So you can't say, well, this is what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with some cardiac issues, so therefore my trajectory is I've got to do this. Well, no. Just like if you have one person that has dementia, which Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia, you can't say, well, everyone's just like that. You have to look at it differently. So I hope that you're also taking away, give this some thought. Look at your support team around you. The people that you are influencers for, people in your Bible study classes, in this congregation where you live, your neighborhoods. Their situations are not the same. So one of the things that I sometimes, well, I regularly face, professionally and personally, is people have good intentions of wanting to help one another. And it's easy for us to say, well, based on this 5-minute conversation you've told me about you and your family, I think you ought to consider this. We want to try to provide a solution or an option. But until you understand the dynamics, it's really hard to come up with options or a roadmap. So I want to encourage you to, in your own aging, myself, I want to preach to myself, and I want to preach to my distinguished friends and colleagues, to just pay attention to who's on your team, who's missing from the team. What questions have you not asked? You know, the questions that you're asking are all valid, and there are other questions. Let me pause for a second, and based on what we've talked about so far, what's the temperature of the room? How are you feeling about things? What questions about issues of aging, things you'd like to address that one of us can answer? Because I have a few things to wrap up before we meet together. Yes, ma'am.
Isn't a question, and I almost raised my hand and did it when he was up talking about the legal, but I thought I needed to share our experience. We moved here 6 years ago from another state and thought we were all set up, everything was fine, and well, just we'll check with an attorney and just make sure everything's. Found out that nothing carried over. There's a big difference in states. So I just want to make sure no one is sitting here with what they've done in another state thinking everything is set. Even the medical directive, we were told, was worded so differently it would do no good here if we tried to use it. We had to redo every document. So I just wanted to share that. So if there's anybody sitting here that's moved in from somewhere and thinks they're all set, well, just double check and make sure.
Well, she raises a good question. I know that we have some people that may be live streamed, and this conversation is archived so that some people will watch it later. So I know that we'll do our best to make sure we capture that as a question. But you're giving an example that moved to another state. You had all this planning that you had done, and you came to Texas and found that it was not at all or as useful. And I don't know, Brendan, will you add something to that? I mean, he's the attorney, but I know that in some cases, some things do transfer, but that's always something to pay attention to. Even your Medicare, your supplemental insurance policies, they're regular. I mean, they may be, some things are federal and some are state specific. So do you have any comment about moving from states and having to redo things or having validated?
Moving from a different state is, you bring up a very good point. Every state's laws are very different. I'm not allowed to practice in California because I don't know California law. It's very different from Texas law. That said, there are what are called uniform codes for some of this stuff. Uniform as in uniform across the states. Now, it is not as thorough as we would like, and I suspect your attorney steered you in the right direction, that especially with things like powers of attorney, advanced directives, and the advanced directive is where you decide whether or not you want artificial life support in end-of-life situations. But those documents are state-specific. The state legislature of Texas has put out the language that they require to be in, the magic language to be in these documents for them to be effective. And so if you're coming from another state and those documents don't have that magic language, it may not do what you want it to do. That is a situation where a trust may be more helpful as far as after you're gone, because a trust is determined by the law of the state where it was created. But that said, your powers of attorney planning for incapacity, you definitely want to, if you move to a different state, get those reviewed at the bare minimum, just to make sure that they comply with the laws of this new state that you're living in. Because many, many people have that situation and find themselves in a tough spot if they haven't proactively planned.
We found out too that there's an extreme difference in the probate, that in some states it's way more complicated.
That is very, very true. Texas luckily makes it fairly easy on
That's what
folks.
we were told.
If I could, I went through 2 years in probate court, and it's one of the most painful things I've ever gone through in my whole life. So I'd just like to say to you all, thank you for being here, but it's no joke if you don't have everything buttoned down properly.
That is sadly very true. Families that otherwise have been harmonious throughout everybody's life, when someone passes away, and unfortunately when money becomes an issue,
That's right. The
people's,
significant amount of assets and money causes grief. There's no question about it, and it's horrible.
yes, ma'am, I'm sorry you went through that.
Guess where the money goes? Attorney.
That's why we encourage you to plan proactively on the front end, because it does save you that money on the back end, for sure.
Thank you.
I was gonna say was a couple of things, before my mother passed a long time, many years ago, but she had written out certain things that she wanted me to do, or certain items in the house that she wanted me to maintain. You know, put everything very clearly. Investments we have done is joint tenants with right of survivorship, which means it stays in your name, but upon your, like the transfer on deed death, transfer on death deed, it goes to the other person. You reporting that.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly, but spell things out. The other thing was, you told me this earlier, on the medical code, I have a good friend who's an RN, that I've given that on. We said, well, how would I know when to make those decisions, especially about the advanced directive? They said, except when Neil stops being Neil, was his question. And I said, yeah, basically agree with that, rather than just existing.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Extended state, yeah. So make things out and plan things out and let somebody know.
The idea is that you get to make the choices and not the burden is left to your family to sort out the mess later on.
I understand about probate because when mom died, we had to do an Ohio state return. They did not tie in with the federal government.
I see.
But luckily, when we did everything, 80% of what they paid, the state didn't count. 5 years later, when my aunt passed, no estate return there. Both were substantial.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are the transfer on death, are they under the uniform?
Don't have transfer on death deeds. Texas has 2 types, and I think they're both in the worksheet I gave you. The transfer on death deed is a creation of statute. The legislature said, we're going to put this deed out there so that it is valid in all circumstances for land in Texas. But you cannot get a Texas transfer on death deed and file it for your property in Oklahoma or in New York, because it's just not going to work.
So anyone who has property they want would have to be in that state.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes,
Is there
sir.
a dollar amount required to do a state tax return or federal tax estate return?
The estate tax only applies to estates over, for a single person, $12 million or $24 million for a couple.
So if it's under that figure,
You don't have to do an estate tax return. No,
what
sir.
about this?
That is federal.
That is federal.
Yes, sir. There's no.
If you agree with that deal, you ought to be like George Steinbrenner, the 1 year that expired, that there was no federal estate tax. He was the owner of the New York Yankees. And, but it's a 9-figure income, yeah. But yeah, there was no federal estate.
That 1 year, 2006 or 7, I think, something like that.
Yeah. Now we're increasing it.
And situation changes, and all the time, from what the legislature's doing and all the political things around that. And so I encourage you, as we kind of assimilate this together, and then shift over to the real meal in a moment, we need to keep up with it. Not only do those situations change, and hopefully we can help others be more proactive in planning to maybe avoid some of the things that we could have gotten to if we had gotten to the precipice. Staying up with it, and also communicating your wishes and desires. I'm grateful for my own family, my family in general, but my parents, because of their aging experience as caregivers. My dad has been very transparent with my sister about who their attorney is, where all their assets are. He said, I think it's still a parent's responsibility to partner with their children as they age together. So the relationship changes. So keep it up. I hope that we have given you a little appetite for more. We are grateful that we had an opportunity to spend this time together, where all three of us were going to sit with you and just thank you for the invitation. It began with Joe Moore to have lunch. If there are questions or information is there. We want to be a resource for the community and are grateful for what First Baptist is doing. And thank you for Stanley and Mary Louise for, what did I say?
But we're going to.
Yes, well, I've been a member of First Baptist for 26 years. And when I came in March, some of you that were there, I grew up with Bob Fuller. We grew up in the same home church. His dad was one of the Sunday school teachers, so it's a small world. So I know our faith connects us beyond our speech impediments. And maybe football. So thank you so much, and thank you for letting us join you, and then we'll stay for lunch and pick our brains.
If I could make a few comments, please. I was in commercial banking for 27 years, and I cannot tell you the number of times that we had to help families both before death and after death. It was constant with us. One of the things is when you do a will, power of attorney or something like that, or making any changes on your account, that person is competent. And if for some reason they are not, then you cannot make any changes. When I took my mother to have her will done, the attorney and the clerk asked her several questions to make sure that she did not have dementia before they would let her do a will. And likewise, when I was in banking and some family member brought in their elderly mother, father, something like that, and they wanted to make a change, we had to make sure they were competent. If they were not, we would not let them change their signature account. We would not do that. And the other thing is, one of the most important documents you sign is your signature card at your financial institution. People don't realize how important that is. As soon as someone dies, the bank will pull that signature card and look at it. You have no idea how many different types of accounts they are. You can have single accounts, you can have multiple accounts, you can have agents, you can have authorized signers, you can have, payable on death, where it transferred immediately. If there's someone that's payable on death and there's joint signers, does the other signer get it? Or do they have to wait till both of them die before it goes to the payable on death? So it's critical that you look at your signature card to find out exactly what it says in that deal. And when Mary's dad died, he had multiple accounts. And several of them were as we thought. A couple were not. And that money did not go to her. It went to somebody else. And we thought it would all go to her, and it did not. So it's critical that you know what kind of account you have. And again, because I was in commercial banking, I saw this on a consistent basis. And the other thing is, banks now have an authority to where if someone comes in and they think that they are not fully cognizant of what they are doing, they will not do the transaction. When my mom became ill, put her in a nursing home, then I became a joint owner on her account. And every time I went to take money out of her account, they would ask me questions. What's this money being used for? It happened every single time because they knew she was old and they knew that I was pulling the money out of it. So that's something else that y'all have to be critical of, to where just because you're on the account, that does not mean the bank has to do what you're saying. You cannot go in there and withdraw money if they think the other person is not covered. And that's all I have. And again, this is because I was in commercial banking and I saw this on a consistent basis. Yes.
So just to add to that, I am nosy when clients call in and ask, hey, I need $5,000. I'm going to ask you, what do you need it for? And it's to that point exactly, because we're trying to protect you, the client, from somebody else taking advantage of you. There's stories of, elderly people are subject to scams, getting money like, oh, I need $15,000 to pay for X, Y, and Z. We actually had, she wasn't a client in my branch, but another Edward Jones advisor had a client that called in and asked for $100,000. The advisor asked, well, what's it for? Oh, it's to pay my realtor because she's selling my house. Red flag. Realtors, you don't ever pay them directly. So if you have people in your corner at the bank or at your, where your investments are held, you want them to be nosy and ask, what are you using the money for? Because it's to protect you. And if they're not, maybe it's time to look elsewhere.
Thank y'all for being here. We enjoyed it, I know, and we'll enjoy sitting at lunch with y'all. And we have a gift for you and one for you. And it's Joe, you already.
I have one.
He left me 2 books. So we've been around for a few years. It's years. I don't know, how old is this book now?
There's some
150, I think.
Yeah.
What a testimony to have a congregation that's.
That's awesome.
It
tells all about our church.
Thank you for having us. Thank you to my colleagues who we get to work together with. Let's eat.
First we'll pray.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's why. Before we eat our dessert, we're going to pray.
Before we eat our dessert, it's past time. Gary Ryan is going to come up and say our prayer.
Let us bow for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you this morning for this meeting that we've had. We thank you, Lord Jesus, that Spencer, Brown, Kelly, Finley, and Brennan Bowes have given of their time to inform us of so many things that some of us may not have even thought of, me included. And so, Lord, today we just give you praise. We thank you for this wonderful day that you have given us. And we ask, Lord, that you would be with us now as we prepare to share some very delicious food prepared by our cooks here. And we give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay. Let's eat. I was waiting for you to say, let's eat.
Oh, yeah.